welcome back to A Businessman's Guide to Almost Everything, the show where I, your host, Kole Berzenji, get to sit down with interesting people from interesting fields. We got to pick apart what makes them tick and what poses threats to their field of work. So today with me, Troy, would you introduce yourself, what you do, and what makes you special?
Certainly, and thank you for having me on the show. My name is Troy Luginbill. I am... right now I'm manager of the Linden Village bookstore here in Linden, former curator and director of the Linden Pioneer Museum. Prior to that was a bookseller at Little Professor Book Center in Gig Harbor, which was my first job. So it's sort of one of the interesting aspects that it's come full circle on me.
I was just going to say full circle, back where we started. Brilliant. So can you tell us a little bit about your journey? Because you've gone around a little bit and you spent how many years as a museum director?
27 years as a museum director, 30 years in Linden now, so.
Oh, wow. So a little bit of experience. I think that's fair to say. So tell us, what has been some of the experience been like? Has it been largely positive being a business leader in Linden?
I don't know about being a business leader, but as far as the experience of Linden goes and getting to know Linden intimately through being a historian of Linden's culture and traditions, it's been a very positive experience. Linden is a very unique community. Personally, I would say that it's definitely been a growth experience for me and created empathy where I may not have had empathy if I'd taken another road.
That's a very well-worded way to put it. No, well, one of the things I realized pretty quickly is that I'm pretty sure everyone knows you here in Linden. No, like you are the town historian, and people, whenever we start talking about stuff like that, they're like, oh yeah, you should talk to Troy if you ever have a question. It's like, Troy. Okay, like I never met him at the time. It's like, oh no, you'll recognize him. You haven't met him, but you'll know when you see him. And like you got a whole bowler hat, you got a good look to you. It's distinctive, and I appreciate it.
Oh, well, thank you. Thank you. I hate to say it began as oddly just a promotional thing for the museum when I first started there. Then found out that there's a reason that the pioneers wore clothing like this. It's really practical, especially in the Pacific Northwest. I mean, you can give me all your REI stuff, everything along those lines, and oddly, I'll take a good frock coat with a high collar, a bowler hat, a vest, and a good high-collared button-up shirt any day over that here. It works.
I give myself 10 years before I start sporting the exact same thing. Really. Right. Okay, so can you tell us a little bit about your journey, though? Because you spent 25 years in a specific field, and then you transition into becoming the general manager of a bookstore. Why was that? To answer that specific question, which is more sort of what is the transitional portion of that journey, because that journey from beginning to and getting through to starting at the museum is really a first important step in the realization of my career. Sure.
I guess I'm not going to say my career, my adult life and the wishes that I want for my adult life. But the transition for the museum to a bookseller, it's sort of funny in that I hadn't realized it at the time. But in coming back to bookselling, I was also transitioning from another aspect of curation. So really, instead of calling my career one of being a bookseller or one of being a museum director, curator, my career is one of curation.
Interesting.
I have spent my career finding and assembling material collections of things that I think people are of interest or that people would like me to assemble as those collections. And then I've either kept them and preserved them or sold them to you.
There we go. So then what about a bookstore was inspiring? Because clearly lover of history, lover of reading, I imagine, too.
I've been an avid reader, and it is... It's something stories have always nagged me. It's ever since the beginning of my life. I've loved stories. And oddly, the one thing I've found interesting is that the more absurd the story or the more out there the story, the more for me realistic it is because I don't know. There's just the one thing I found is that with history is that the best authors in the world couldn't come up with the things that happen naturally. I mean, life is so deliciously absurd at times that you just have to sit back and just laugh and just say, dear Lord, I can't even believe this is actually happening. I'm lucky enough to know about it. So that's really sort of what the curation became ostensibly in my life, was before I even thought about making a career out of anything. I just wanted to collect unique experiences, and somehow was drawn to the field of anthropology and archaeology to accomplish that, which has now led to where I am today.
I'm glad that you brought up the oddly humorous angle to history, because I'm 100% on the same boat there with you. I remember a few years ago, I read the Gulag Archipelago because I wanted to have a bad time. I wanted to feel bad.
Right.
Yeah. But one of the things I didn't expect, because I knew it was going to be gut-wrenching, it was going to be just this brutal examination of an awful time of human history. But I didn't expect it to be funny. And not in like a ha-ha, that's a good joke kind of way, but it's just so absurd that you go, how did this happen?
Exactly. I mean, it's you try to somehow conceive of all the events that managed to lead up to that one particular instance, that one moment that you look at, and there's just it's simply beyond human conception. And I think that's one of the things that I've always been a fan of, really esoteric, far out philosophical thoughts. And one of those that just absolutely continuously, I'm going to say plagues me, because I think about it regularly, at least weekly, and in an effort to understand it. And that's the idea of an accession event. It's a term that was coined by an author, Ian Banks, back in the 1980s. He wrote a beautiful series of novels about the culture, which was basically humanity progressed to its finest with artificial intelligence, and yet humanity is relevant still among it, and somehow, for lack of a better idea, paradise has been reached within the galaxy. And one of the books that he talks about is this situation of an accession event, where the finest minds in the galaxy realize that something's happening, but we have no idea what it is. And that's the concept behind an accession event. And that is, it's something that is, it's happening, but it is utterly inconceivable, just truly inconceivable. The only thing you know is an event occurred. You don't even necessarily know what that event was. You just know something happened. And history I take a look at, and I see these really sort of accession events.
Right.
These places where history has become so utterly absurd that you can't begin to even fathom how any of this would take place. It's beyond insane. It's just utterly random, and yet still somehow has meaning.
Right.
And is still somehow real and affects the world.
That's an interesting way to frame it.
Yeah. And so, so that's the piece. So I took a look at that and really began realizing that the concept of an accession event isn't something that physicists mull over after a few drinks at, and a long day's work of figuring out relativity or quantum mechanics or something. That this is something that the human mind struggles with on a constant basis, and in many cases shrugs off without ever noticing.
Yeah, because we almost have to simplify the reality that we're in for the sake of understandability.
Exactly. Which just begins leading to more questions about accession events and how those occur. And that is reflected in history. And of course, then any story that you tell, because history is just a series of stories of events. So any story you tell, whether it be real or fake or made up or what have you, is also in and of itself has some level of reality. And can you conceive then of a book written that is in and of itself an accession event, a book that is profound, meaningful, and yet utterly undecipherable?
That's fascinating, because there was I got two thoughts at the same time, and so having to disseminate between the two of them. But I remember I was listening, it was Jordan Peterson. I know he's a bit of a controversial figure for some, but he had this line that I really liked and it's annoying, really, but someone asked him, but do you think it was about the Bible specifically, do you think the Bible is true? He's like, well, what do you mean by true? Which is such a frustrating answer. Right. But then at the same time, this is the other thought, because I saw a meme once, and it was looking at historians for World War II. And they're like, the death count was between this much, and they fought for these days, but this account differs and that account differs, and like the battle might have never happened, the motivations, you gotta count that. Then you go back to Herodotus. And he's like, I could tell you the exact number of men. I can record an entire speech that goes on for hours. I could tell you everything, and that's the truth. Is it probably a bit simplified? Yeah, maybe some things are hyperbolic, but you know what? The essence of it is true. And it messes with the way that you see history, because you gotta understand that history has changed.
Not just history has changed, that the history was originally recorded in, they say from the victors write history. Mm-hmm. Well, it's not the victors, the historians that write history, and the historians always have a frame of reference to their own cultural frame of reference.
Yes.
And it's great that you brought up Herodotus, because he is probably the single most hotly debated historian out there. Yep. Because oddly enough, a lot of his facts are truly correct.
Yeah.
I mean, at least he used, even though he doesn't cite them, he uses primary records in a lot of cases of, so these are the official battle counts of the Battle of, these are official this is the official that actually happened. Did he make it up and write it that way? Is he towing the line? Was it accepted common wisdom at the time? Well, the primary resources we have support it. However, the primary resources were also created by a certain group of people, and they certainly were not independent of that creation. But one of the things that I love about Herodotus, because this is the thing which really got me started. This was the first accession event that I had thinking about culture. And that was the nomads of the steppes. The late Bronze and early Iron Age steppe cultures that were beginning to flood from Central Asia into the Middle East and into Eastern Europe at the time. The Sarmatians were one of the first. The Scythians, my personal favorites, the ultimate party crowd, and they absolutely turned the world of the Mediterranean on its head because the culture was so different. One, you no longer with the nomadic cultures, they were egalitarian, the first true known egalitarian cultures in the world.
Really?
They were not patriarchal, matriarchal. Being a nomad was so hard. Everybody put in.
That's interesting.
At least, the certain least. So women could hunt. Kids could hunt. Kids could ride horses from the age of 4. Wow. There were expectations that were normally limited by culture, defined by culture, that were now defined by need, and culture built around that need.
Right.
Okay. And Herodotus makes up the concept of the Amazons based upon the Scythians and the Sarmatians, because the first Greeks that began to go over to sort of see what were going on, Greece was attempting, especially Athens, trying to colonize the Black Sea area at this point. And they began getting these stories of raids. And so Greek warriors would head out, and the Greeks, in their own inimicable fashion, many of the stories would be how they would wait for the males of the village to go out, or the camp to go out on a hunting party, so that they could just head in, kill the women and children, and then deal with the guys later. Well, much to their chagrin, they kept hearing repeated accounts of Greek soldiers riding into the village or running into the village. The Greeks didn't ride. They didn't have stirrups. Running into the village as warriors, getting ready to slaughter everybody, and finding women who were fighting back with swords and bows, children who were using bows at age 7, things that were absolutely unheard of, because no proper human being that was civilized would ever do anything like that. And yet they were kicking the crap out of the Greeks.
Right. That's funny.
And it is, and I'm trying to remember the story of, goodness gracious. The Greek king, facing one of the Scythian king at the time, and how the Greek armies had massed for the big battle, and the Scythians had agreed. And so the Scythians were lined up on their horses, and they were ready to go on one side of the valley, and the Greek armies were on the other side of the valley. And the Scythians begin their charge, and the Greeks are thinking to themselves, we've got this, no problem, because, we've got our spears, we've got the hoplite formations. Right. No, we can break cavalry, no problem, especially small pony-mounted cavalry. And halfway down the valley, a rabbit goes shooting off to the left, and the entire Scythian army rotates and goes on a hunting trip. They just leave the battlefield, leaving the Greeks utterly befuddled, right? They're like, what's going on? Do they not respect us this much to have a stand-up fight? Well, the Greeks then went and the Scythians then went and did what the Greeks kept trying to do to their camps. They went around the army in its entirety because they were much, much faster mounted and simply raided the Greek settlement behind them, utterly destroying the Greek settlement.
This is why so many of those historians, all of a sudden, it's making sense why they all hated the Scythians.
Yeah.
Oh, God, that's good.
Yeah, and it wasn't just, it was the Sarmatians and the Scythians kept having to follow up, and it's just this wave after wave throughout European history of Asian steppe nomads, whether it then be the Huns, then the Mongols are probably the greatest and best known because of, Genghis Khan's empire. But each of these, it's interesting because each of them acts to European historians as a succession event. Something that they can't conceive that a society like this even exists.
Right.
And now these devils are riding down upon us and utterly destroying our civilization because their cultural values are so utterly different and so you see in history accession event after accession event. The first time that you saw cavalry as a soldier who never had the only cavalry in time horses to be used would be with chariots.
Right.
Centaurs. You start creating myths and legends, and then you begin wondering how many of the myth and legends that we have created today were simply cultures bashing up against each other that had no.
Oh, for sure.
No commonality of frame of reference.
We even see like a smaller, less outrageous version of this with the Romans during the Punic Wars.
Yeah.
And the Carthaginians were coming up, and like Hannibal, people have written books on Hannibal because he's such a fascinating figure. And his whole life is, of course, almost mythological at this point. But even just the personality of the Carthaginians that came up, like they come down with these elephants, they're outrageous, and we don't understand what they're saying. And so all of a sudden, whenever the Romans are depicting the Carthaginians in plays, they don't speak Carthaginian, so they just go bar, 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 bar. All of a sudden, we have the barbarians.
Yeah.
It all makes sense now.
Well, and it does. And then so you add to that how much of that mythology are myths that have been forgotten, legends that have been forgotten because at one point something spurred them, but they've been forgotten, and the only remnants then left of them are what we find in language.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a huge part.
Because language is that one piece. It is part of an adjunct human ability and human memory. And so, oral history, human beings are the only creatures that do speak. We know that other animals have languages to some extent.
Like bees dance.
Well, chimpanzees talk. We've taught sign language. We know that whales have some level of a communication structure, porpoise, all these types of things. But human beings are the only ones that we can see actual oral records of history being created and kept. So we're using language as an adjunct memory in addition to communicating present.
Well, yeah, it's like, I think we are sometimes numb to that with just how big of a deal writing was, even back in the ancient world. Just the idea that you can transfer data over time, slowly, but like that's huge. And to put it into perspective, you got to look at it from people who were living in the Middle Ages. We used to call it the Dark Ages. I think that's coming a little out of fashion. But these people, as far as they were concerned, were living in a post-apocalyptic world where they had records of this world-spanning empire with technologies that they have remnants of. Some of them still even work, but they can't figure it out. They don't know how well aqueducts work right after.
Right.
It's amazing. Somewhere in this is about a business podcast. I don't remember where we lost that.
Well, this is sort of that piece, getting around the ranch, so to speak. But these are the questions that ultimately led me to a practical aspect. The practical aspect was I by sheer random chance got the job at the Little Professor Book Center. Actually, it was a husband-wife team, and the wife was interviewing and said, I offered a job to a fella. He's going to be coming in later today. I came in later that day. The husband did me a quick interview and said, yeah, I like you. I agree. You have the job. Turns out I wasn't the guy. but the husband didn't want to fire me. So
that means you did a really good interview.
Yeah, and it turns out that the other guy had also had actually accepted another position. So it was this weird sort of kismet that brought me to the Little Professor Book Center.
Right.
And it was at that point in time that I began to realize, just what words contain. More than just. It was the time I began to, because I simply had an opportunity to explore literature from different cultures, literature from different time periods, different literature across the United States. I'll tell you, it's a lot of people will argue vociferously with me, and this is where you're going to get all sorts of negative comments. I personally think The Great Gatsby sucked. It was a horribly written book.
That's fine. You're allowed to share that on this. Yeah, I'm okay with this.
But it was the book for the time. It defined a generation. And so you have this huge generation who are saying, that's me, that's my experience. It's like with Gen Xers in The Breakfast Club. If you look at The Breakfast Club as a movie, it's horrible.
Now you're really going to get some.
I know, this is where I'm really going to get it. It's horribly written, it's horribly acted, but every Gen Xer who watches it is like, that's me. That's my experience.
Oh gosh, I think we're gonna have people who are my generation that was growing up in like the 2000s. It's gonna be like a Michael Bay Transformers movie. Like, that's my generation's art. Oh gosh, maybe art is dying. I don't know.
Well, no, but the thing is art is culture, and so it's one of those things you can see. The great thing about coming at it from the outside is that you can learn to see it from the inside, but you can also view it from the outside. And then since you can learn 2 viewpoints, you can learn 3 or 4.
Oh, of course.
And that's one of the things that I always find absolutely delicious when I see it in movies, or these days games or online games are the best because of the Easter eggs that people hide in there.
Oh, sure.
It's just that it's how they take all that culture, those cultural icons, and throw them in there just so that you have all the background reference. So when you see it, hey, I recognize that.
And some of these inside jokes have been going on for like 30 years too.
Right, exactly.
Yeah, it is funny because video games, they're going to become one of the, I'm sure, pillars of culture, if it's not already.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah. Like, good heavens, I remember I knew a fellow once, and he was into the Fortnite. He was really into Fortnite. Everyone knows Fortnite now. And he was explaining to me all the different like movies and books even that are in it now. And like, I'm pretty sure they got Sherlock Holmes fighting Thanos from Avengers Infinity War in there.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Which historians, I'm sure, are going to look back one day during this time period. They're going to go, what on earth was going on?
Yes. But I guess you think about it, every historian sort of looks back at those time periods and asks what exactly is going on here. This seems pretty strange to me. And it's, you take a look at any given human culture. And if there's a written record that can be accessed, or permanent record that can be accessed in one way, shape, or form, the one thing that they found out about that history is there is at least one utter collapse of civilization as they knew it at the time.
Yeah.
In there. Whether it be the sea peoples of the Mediterranean, whether it be the Three Kingdoms period of China, whether it be, and I cannot for the life of me remember what the name of it is, but there was similar mysterious collapse of civilization in along the Gold Coast in Africa. Oh, back in the 1300s.
Interesting.
It's as they find more and more of these written records. They look at them and they're like, oh, the Aztecs and the Mayans. I mean, good Lord, how many mysterious civilizations do we know of now that lived in southern Mexico, Central America?
Yeah,
that collapsed for completely unknown reasons.
Yeah, and that's, I know with like the Joe Rogan types, that's probably an unfair way to describe them. But there's this particular sect of people that are increasingly getting interested with this like new take on archaeology.
Oh, yes.
Where just like maybe before 10,000 years ago, we had super advanced societies that all fell apart. And then I know some people are really against that idea, but then I was just reading yesterday, they found like 2 kilometers worth of tunnels underneath the pyramids of Pyramids of Giza. like this massive network that we just didn't know about. We already don't know how they built the pyramids in the first place, and now there's more.
Well, see, and that's where archaeology comes in. In that, and that's where I'll disagree. We do know how they built the pyramids. It's actually pretty obvious. I mean,
Slaves?
No, actually.
Really?
They're not sure necessarily if they were indentured servants, but there are huge archaeological evidences of towns nearby the pyramids.
Really?
I mean, literally within walking distance. And they were for the craftsmen and their families.
That makes sense.
Because there was at least 2 generations that lived there. So they're like mining camps. A lot of people would never realize that there was a town of almost, oh goodness gracious, 400 people. And its height, I think 2,000 is a guesstimate, up near Glacier. Beyond Glacier, up by Church Mountain, at the base of Church Mountain.
Oh.
It was called Shuckson. It was a mining camp that existed for 3 years while the gold rush was going on in the early 1900s up there. And there were no permanent buildings whatsoever. The only permanent building was the Inn and Saloon, which was literally built sort of in more of a Native American fashion of planks roped to a general frame and enough whatever on top to keep the rain off of you type of a thing.
They had other concerns in that saloon, I'm sure.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
But it's that kind of a situation. I mean, we don't realize how quickly large populations can pop up
Sure.
for projects like that when a massive amounts of people, Hoover Dam. Okay. I mean, the city that popped up around Hoover Dam while it was being built was over 8,000.
Really?
For the course of 5 years.
And then it's just gone after that?
Dam was built. They were done. They went on somewhere else.
That makes sense. Yeah. Yeah, like people are migratory. Like even after all these centuries, we still are, really.
Right, exactly. So, so you get something like that with the pyramids. And even though we ourselves are coming at it from a different cultural frame of reference, i.e. one of, well, I would have used a bulldozer and they obviously didn't have bulldozers to do it. So obviously you couldn't have done it. It's sort of becomes that human ego, which again, you've got to wonder how much that plays in the course of the record of history. Well, if I don't know how to do it and I couldn't have done it, then obviously it had to be somebody better than me.
Sure.
And they were not better than me. They're uncivilized, they're savages, they're ancients. And so consequently, they could not figure out how to use human power to drag a stone or place a stone or anything along those lines. It's one of the ones I love is Secrets of the Castle.
Secrets of the Castle.
It's a documentary. A fella in France is building a 13th century castle from scratch. Using all the methods. So again, another example is in his case, he's doing it fairly piecemeal and long term. But when a castle was being built, you could easily have a town of 400 craftsmen, masons, clay workers, carpenters, everybody who is employed because they would probably be employed for most of their career lifetime putting that castle up.
Just on that one project.
Just on that one project. And they were in such limited supply because of the education systems back then that they always knew wherever they went, they had a job.
Right.
They were always going to have a job. They just had to go and live there and be willing to commit 10, 15 years.
Yeah, that's another thing that puts into perspective. Like Notre Dame took 2 generations to build.
Yeah.
We don't have anything in our modern day to really compare that to, except for maybe like going to Mars.
Or if you ever live down in Gig Harbor, Tacoma area, the I-5-16 interchange. But that's been going on for 3 generations now. But
yeah, by the time you've finally gone out, your child's a man now. He's ready to go out.
Oh no, I know a fella who was he was younger than my parents who started working on that interchange when he was a young man. His son is now has finally retired early from working on that, and I guess the state finally said it's done, even though they're going to start construction on the new version of it in a few years. So if nothing else, you can drag a project out through pure poor planning at any given point in time.
Absolutely. I remember I grew up in Ottawa, capital of Canada, for anyone who's not aware, I guess. And if you ever fly into Ottawa, when you're leaving the airport, you pass this bridge and it looks like the symbol of the city. It's this funny shaped O. And it's a walking path for people to walk over the roads if they don't have a car for whatever reason. It took them something like 15 years to build, hundreds and hundreds of thousands of dollars. And like we knew private contractors at the time. They're like, it takes like 6 months.
Yeah, they shouldn't take this long at all.
But I suppose that's a different issue, I guess. I don't know.
Yeah, coming back to the castle, the thing that I had learned that I never realized, because in my mind, horses in medieval times are sort of synonymous, right?
Sure. Yeah.
Okay, horses were for the wealthy, and they were not, if at all possible, used for labor of any type. Fields would be plowed by oxen. Horses were expensive to keep and maintain. The nobles had them.
Right.
For riding. And so consequently, if you needed to lift stuff, what we would think of as, get a horse and a tackle, right? Start lifting with a crane. They actually used human power. They would have these giant hamster wheels.
Oh,
which
yeah.
4 or 5 guys would walk around in. And they geared it because the medieval world knew gears out. I mean, they knew gearing. And they would gear it so that it could, raise loads as necessary with the minimum amount of human effort. I mean, they used physics and they knew how to do it.
Oh, yeah. That's one of those things that people sometimes don't appreciate. It's just like, if you want to look at like the current age of humanity that we're in, it goes back like 6, 8, maybe 10,000 years. It's not a whole lot of time for us to really change.
No, it's not. I mean, what I was saying, it's not. It is, but it isn't, because technology seems to build on itself.
Oh, sure. Like exponentially so.
Exactly.
Right.
Exactly. But in the process, the culture still has to use the technology. It was in Ian Banks going back. There's a line in his book that goes along the lines of technologic advance for races was not a straight line situation the way every race assumes it is.
Right.
It's actually like free climbing a wall. You get to here, you get to here, you get to here. Some pursue more of a biotechnology aspect, others a quantum physics, and others a more mechanical aspect. But sooner or later, they all get to the top. And so you take a look at our world today. I mean, they had no electricity. And just the most simple act of using electricity would be an accession event for somebody in the Middle Ages.
Oh, yeah, it changes reality as far as they're concerned.
Yeah, yet most of their craftsmen were better versed in physics and geometry than you'll find of any given carpenters, masons, what we consider today's technical craftsmen.
Yeah, I heard someone had a line once where AI will be like what the internet was to the last generation, only more so. And just like the internet to the last generation, the AI will only make us dumber and less efficient at everything we used to have to do ourselves.
Right.
Yeah, which, like, it's probably not untrue, but at the same time, you've opened Pandora's box. You have no choice but to go forward.
Well, and it's also, it's like having a bigger toolbox. The hard part for us, and hopefully what AI will help us do, is begin to sort through those tools, since our box is so much bigger these days.
Oh, sure.
Is what is the appropriate tool for the job, and how to use it, because ostensibly that's where we don't have to do that anymore. We don't, that was the reason we invented writing, was to record things. Again, it's an adjunct memory piece.
Yeah.
We couldn't record enough information in oral language, an oral history. We had to write it down to create that piece. And so now AI has got to the point where it's indexing our information automatically for us, because we now have so much written down. We need a semi-conscious index to search for us, because we can't physically comprehend or do that search anymore.
But no, it's too much data. Again, to use the language of evolution, the human has not evolved enough to be able to comprehend the amount of data, the volume that we are exposed to every day.
Yeah.
AI can, though.
And exactly, AI can.
Well, I think we got through like half a question.
That's true. Sorry, I get off on tangents. I think it's one of the reasons I do enjoy working in culturally related aspects is because it just absolutely fascinates me. And yeah, I have a tendency to get down some rabbit holes.
No, I'm glad there's someone else that shares much of these same passions as I do, because I don't get to. I try to talk to my wife about Herodotus, and she's like, "That's great. That's cool.
Yeah, that's really cool. You wrote 3 books, you know." Yeah, you said that before.
And then the moment I start talking about Socrates, she's like, "Okay, that's great. I'm going to go. You keep talking though."
That's because she recognizes Socrates and already knows how boring that's going to get, right? It was boring in high school when she first heard the name.
I'll close out with this, just because this does eventually have to end. But I remember my wife, I don't think she's ever forgiven me for this, but on our honeymoon, I brought 2 books with me. One of which was Neil Gaiman's American Gods, because I got it recently. I want to read a little bit of Neil Gaiman. But the one that I was really determined was The Republic.
Oh, jeez.
And so for the first half of my week, if I wasn't out there with my wife doing something, like if we were just relaxing, I had The Republic. And she's like, "I'm still here. You sure you want to read a 3,000-year-old Greek book?" Is like, kind of, yeah, it's really good.
Well, especially being one of the foundational cultural pieces for Western civilization.
Yeah, and he's got some hot takes in there. And like when he walks through it, you're like, maybe I do agree with this. Maybe propaganda is good. I don't know. But anyways.
Yeah. Well, no, and that's, yeah.
Anyways, I guess that's the takeaway for this lesson. Read more Socrates, folks. Anyways, thank you for tuning in to A Businessman's Guide to Almost Everything. We sure did cover a lot in this one.
Yes.
And I'm sure the next episode will go about as well.
One hopes.
One hopes. All right, take care there, folks, and we'll see you next time.